Okay, we're gonna start out with putting the my Patron in the chat, and we will get to this. And we're basically we're not gonna cover the Mueller thing specifically because we already went over that yesterday. In this one, we're actually gonna go over the idea of what the actual coverage and what the coverage overall means in general. And in this case, what we're going to be looking at specifically is uh, we're going to look at some of the news coverage and some of the news cycles, what it actually means uh, uh, for them, and why they're actually doing this from the actual legacy media coverage, the news coverage, what it actually means, and why they actually do what they do. Now, we need to understand there's actually a couple of different points of what they're doing. Number one is they want the status quo out there. This is the number one point, is they do not want an actual change in the actual policy. This is something that needs to be understood, is when we look at actually the people that they grab for the actual positions and what they want to enforce in the actual positions. This doesn't matter. We're talking Fox, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN. Um, it really uh, Fox Business, uh, whatever type of station we're talking about. With the there might be a couple of rare outliers with this, but for the most part, what they want is they want to ensure that what you're going to get is you're going to get the an actual status quo line. Now, there's a few outliers. Fox Business has a couple of them on there, but Fox Business usually does not get the type of airplay as some of the other ones. They have Kennedy on there, and then out on there they have, and then Lou Dobbs is a little bit different from the actual status quo. That's another one that was a little bit different uh, than preaching the status quo lines. Then on the Fox News channel, you have Tucker Carlson's definitely different than the status quo lines. But everyone else with it, if you're going to notice from every other station, they're preaching the status quo lines. Uh, the only type of thing you're actually going to get anything different out of any type of media is out of RT. You're going to get something which is a little more classic to what CNN used to be like in the late 80s to mid 90s, the way it used to be. And words focusing on a broad spectrum of media, and they would bring on guests from all different spectrums to ensure that you actually can get a good variety of coverage and a real good view of what the world is. That's from RT America with it. Now people what this is why what the media does is the media runs a smear campaign on them to say, oh, it's Russian television. Well, it's not Russian television. They're because all they're getting is a small little bump from them to start up, and that's the only thing they're getting from them. And this is where they get, and there is no input from Russia for what they put on, because otherwise they would be hearing from them for all these different guests, and a lot of times the guests are not putting on things that are proper for the Russian government, and it would be negative against the Russian government. I mean, there are a lot of people that are stating things that would be negative toward the Russian government, and they're running things that are because they're running people that are coming from all different spectrums of the political spectrum, so it would not necessarily be in line with that. Uh, just like within any type of group with it. Now, this is completely different than other types of TV with it if you're looking at it, because if you look at like what we're doing, that's it's almost the same way if you end up viewing, like, let's say CNN in another country. Now CNN, if you view it in the United States, is completely different than CNN in other nations. CNN in other nations is completely different because it merely gets the funding from those other nations, and those other nations control the actual way that it comes out, and you'll see that it's completely different. And that's why when it comes to the other nations, is the actual outcome is going to be completely different. And that's why you will actually see it's actually much different in those other nations than it is in the United States, and it's nothing like it is here. But what we're seeing here with a lot of our legacy media, why it's actually dying out, is because of what they're doing. Is they push kind of for the status quo, this kind of like mediocrity from both sides, and of the coverage. So they're not actually giving you an actual full view, and they're cutting off a lot of the view of what people would want to see. And it ends up being where, when it comes to foreign policy, the foreign policy from both sides is identical, and they want to make sure that you're getting that, and they so that people think that no matter that it's presidential for a president to always go to war. Well, there's the majority of the country does not like war, and they've gotten to this point now. And we know this because with the way people have reacted to it. And the fact is people have gotten very, very war weary because of what happens to our people in our military, and they've gotten such poor treatment by the Veteran Affairs uh, when they've come back with it, and the impact of basically these what they've been made to do with drone killings and basically killing innocent civilians, and they've been horrified with this. And essentially they come back with PTSD from this because of what they've been made to do. Now, when we look at now, and this is some of the things that we see with it now, that's what you're seeing with this kind of narrow band uh, of coverage. Now, when we see this idea of when it applies to Trump, is that they'll try and come up with this illusion that they want Trump impeached. Now, they'll bring on these politicians that create the same illusion, and the politicians that come up with that, they don't want Trump impeached either, really, because they know if he gets impeached, it would impeachment and removal. Neither side wants it, but they're talking it up because they know that it would be it becomes a good talking point, and that's something that needs to be understood. And when we're talking about this, is it's not about actually this point of that. It's about earning money. Now, the politicians, such as most of these Democrats out there, they want money in their party, and they know that they can keep talking it up. And it's always about talking this point up. And from the actual media, they want basically money from people being interested in this point of this whole point of talking about Trump impeachment. Now, they were hope. This is why they were hoping that the outcome of the Mueller investigation turned out different, because it was going to continue, or at least continue with the Mueller investigation longer. They were hoping this because the fact is they wanted it to go longer, because this gives them more to talk about. With the Mueller investigation cuts, it might this gives them less to talk about, and they can't start spinning their wild accusation conspiracy theories such as Rachel Maddow does. And this starts cutting out a lot of their material that they would want to start talking about. And this is a problem for what the media wants to do. And when we start looking at some of the ideas of what ends up happening for the uh, when we look at some of the ideas which happens in the media, is the media ends up being uh, the media ends up being completely uh, complicit in what these ideas are, and they end up coming up with these crazy ideas. Uh, so we end up seeing that the media a, is basically out there doing basically these things out for not necessarily for their political goals, but for actually their business model. As we see, what their political goals would essentially be for removing him from office, because they would essentially want him out of office, but this would be completely counterproductive for their business model of the media companies. And we know that they definitely do not want this. And this is something. This is very. This is and it was something that's is was basically a has been basically the whole impeachment was basically something that was out there just to make money, and it's probably going to continue because they know that it's as it still is kind of a cash cow, but they're not going to actually push for the push it from they're not going to put push from its from actually as hard as they once were, because they don't really have the investigation to rely upon. Now they're going to try and most likely switch their point of view of what they want, and they're going to try to push for more intervention, like intervention in Syria they're going to try to push for restoring intervention in Syria, and getting intervention out in Venezuela, which is what people like Marco Rubio want. And this is basically what we're talking about with the media. So they're not going to be essentially uh, friendly to things that are going to be against some of the ideas that are against this status quo of policy and politics. They're always going to essentially return to this idea. When the if we saw when they end up being positive on Trump, it's always when he does things like bombs, uh, like drops bombs unconstitutionally. And this is something when they're positive on Trump, and this is when he listens to neoconservative advisors, and they like it when he actually listens to neoconservative advisors and follows their lead. Now, when he starts to listen to people like Rand Paul, they start drumming up the Trump impeachment ideas with it, because he's falling out of their idea of that narrow band of the way politics should be run, the status quo. And they feel that you should either A, be like Hillary Clinton, or B, be like John McCain. If you're outside of that little narrow band realm, you're troublesome. I'm I mean, if you look at the way that they've handled the media has handled both, like specifically, we'll take CNN for example. Look at the way CNN has handled Tulsi Gabbard in the past, and look at the way the media has handled Rand Paul in the past. They have treated them like garbage. And there's a reason why they've treated them like garbage, because they realize that war is a big racket, and war actually helps them out as an actual company. They like uh, they like displaying war because they feel it raises their ratings. And regardless if people do not like war, they think it raises their ratings. So what they do is they push for it. And anybody that's actually goes into Congress and actually preaches against it, they view those people as an actual threat. Now, they're not going to obviously bring on people like Daniel McAdams, or people like Ron Paul, or people like Jeff Deist, because the fact is that would be completely counterproductive, because those are going to be more people that are going to be anti-war. And when they get sitting members that are essentially talking against war, they don't like that, and they want to essentially badmouth them and call them crazy. They love, and if you look at some of the members with it, of the media, they love basically stating that John McCain was a hero. Well, what did he do that he was a hero? He essentially made propaganda tapes the uh, for the communist Vietnamese. He made basically so he was a traitor to his own country. He basically would do wet starts on his fighter jets, so it caused basically a massive explosion on the actual on one of the actual ships he was actually launching from, and it killed over 100 people. So this was he was essentially a complete and utter screw up as an actual Navy pilot. When he is actually flying out in Vietnam, he hit a tree. He was not shot down. He hit a tree. So when people are saying, "Oh, he was shot down," no, he hit a tree. So, and this is why this is one of the ones they praise. Another one they praise is Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton was, when dealing with a lot of the stuff for the Nixon case with it, even though the Nixon case is still under, there's a lot of questions revolving around data, if the data was actually planted on him or not, and if it was really legitimate. She was essentially trying to make sure that it was going to be dropped, so that and she was trying to basically deliberately screw up the case when she was on it, uh, and this is why she was removed, so that basically the Democrats could win the next election. Now she did this deliberately. She was essentially politically honest, so she was thrown off, and not much after she lost. And then we also had the case where she was basically laughing about getting a rapist off a uh, off a rape charge for when he passed a lie detector test and laughing about it. When he passed the lie detector and it shows the lie detectors are not foolproof, and she was laughing about it. And the fact is we could see that this is kind of what they feel is the ideal for the country, is people who are completely immoral and basically are complete traitors to the country. And if you look at what these people have done when it comes to foreign policy to the nation, they've destroyed it. They had this idea of it's always okay to go to war and it's always okay to destroy other nations. And they have no concern about killing innocent people and no concern about what the actual blowback it would be to the United States when after you do kill these innocent people. And this is what your media is actually praises. And this is the actual problem that you're going to actually notice why when it comes out to being who they actually think is ideal. And this is the actual problem of of what they are. This is actually why they're actually kind of dying out. And this is why they're interested in earning cash over this idea of actually journalistic ethics. And this is something that's very, very important. And this is something that needs to be understood. And if people don't understand it, they're actually going to that that if people don't understand it by now with it, that they're probably never going to understand it, because these media companies are not are only interested as an actual business model to earn money. And the fact is because they're actually hurting for these things with it, they're willing to set up crony deals with crony special deals with different social media companies, and willing to use their little such as CNN willing to use their little rat Oliver Darcy to get rid of the competition. And we know what their little rat is capable of. And because we know he's willing to basically do whatever it takes to get rid of any type of competition out there. And we know that they're willing to do whatever it takes to get uh, whatever it takes to basically eliminate any type of top competition. And we have YouTube that basically is willing to put all of these legacy media sites at the top of the list and put any legitimate media sites pages after them. We have the same thing. We have basically Facebook basically declaring legitimate news sites to be problematic, and being now having their pages removed, like Zero Hedge, and yet them allowing pages like CNN to still exist because of these cases. And this is basically what we're talking about, is that there's basic cushy deals where they can still exist, uh, but yet we have the case of but yet we have the we have the cases of the links to social media that they're basically trying to get cushy deals to eliminate any competition. And they know that any competition is going to be harmful to them. And this is where we come from. And we know that that's where we're sitting at. And this is basically this realm that we're within. And it's basically where we have these companies that are trying to essentially protect one another. We have social media companies that are trying to protect the legacy media companies from dying out. So what they do is they say, okay, you get preferential treatment over any legitimate journalism, even though you do not actually have any journalistic ethics, because you essentially don't believe in journalistic ethics whatsoever, and you are just basically out for being political hacks. And that's where we're actually at. They're basically out for whatever earns the most money, because they can't get money by the normal actual streams, because they have overpaid morons who do not know anything in their actual fields, and they have not done journalism for, I would say, nearly what is it, 50, 60 years, 70 years, because we don't have people actually going out in the field and actually do anything. They're just repeating all the same thing everyone else is doing, and they've been doing this for a long time, and no one else out there is doing it. Then there's nobody out there in the legacy media that actually does journalism, because we have because we I mean, when we're looking at Woodward and Bernstein, we know they're suspect if they actually did anything with journalism, because the fact is it's likely that was a completely concocted thing with uh, internal agencies that were likely wanting to get rid of Nixon. And if you look at their writing since then, you could see that it's likely and writing before then, you can see that it's likely that was the case, because their writing is very, very sophomoric at best, and their writing success is actually quite weak at best. And since they haven't been able to come up with a lead since then, I guess you could actually kind of see that these were kind of like, let's drop something on these couple little schmucks, and let's help them out, and they'll become superstars, and 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 allows us as this department of the CIA not to end up taking this massive hit for what we're about to do. And that's the way it would actually work out. And it was a different way from actually providing an actual hit on the president, which I think is what ended up happening with Kennedy, when they step out of line from the actual what the establishment wants, is that's what they do. And I think instead of doing that, I think they felt that it was a little bit extreme, so that's what they did. They set the guy up. And I think it ends up going with the some of the things that he said about some elites, such as like Bohemian Grove, where which is one of the elite get-togethers, and he referred them with some gay epithets, and and that probably insulted them, and they probably got a little bit pissed off with that, and that probably led to them requesting his ouster. And it's not too easy, and it's not too hard to set those things up. You just say, oh, he requested this. Oh, and then all you have to do is just do a little cut and paste on the audio, and it's from just record them, cut and paste audio, boom, done. And it's not much of a conspiracy theory to cut and paste audio. I mean, we've had this ability for quite some time, since ever since we've actually had the ability to record audio, you can cut and paste it. Ever since it's been able to be on tape, so we're talking, if we're even on just reel to reel, what is that? Since like the what is that, 50s? I believe is reel to reel. Is I believe it's either 50s or I believe it's 40s is reel to reel is when we started that technology. So we're talking that we've had the ability to essentially splice audio since that point, and that we could actually get a pretty accurate ability to do that, which means he would have been able to they would have been able to essentially do that on a president with pretty spectacular ease. Now, being that it didn't have to be an actual solid cop. Now, we probably had better equipment by that time than reel to reel, but you could essentially do it for anybody from that point on, and it didn't. And I believe it was on actual tape, actual regular tape by then. So that so we're talking that regular smaller size tapes by then. So and that's real easy to splice audio with that, where it's actually not that difficult, especially if you have any decent equipment. And we're talking, this is the CIA, and their budget would have actually been quite decently sized. I mean, they were actually at this time working on to spy on the Soviet Union with they used cats with radio antennas in their tails, and this has actually been declassified. Though it not being a failed project because the cats ended up being hit by cars, and that this was to go after the Soviet Union embassy in the United States, and it was to spy on them, and they were it was with the hopes that they could enter the embassy, and this ended up costing, I believe it was some like project that ended up being at the time costing somewhere lines of like $4,000 or $5,000, and which is a lot of money. But this should give you an idea of what ends up going on, why that's very very why that makes it very very plausible that they could easily do something like that. Now, when it comes down to the media with them, they basically, we don't have any legitimate we have not had, I mean, for a long time, legitimate journalism in the mainstream, because they just do not believe in actually going out getting the story. This is not something that they do. That's relegated solely to the idea of the independent journalist, and I don't consider myself a journalist. I'm basically doing a little bit of political analysis, and I do mainly history, and I leave journalism to other parties. And there's plenty of other great parties out there in social media that do some great journalism, and they actually go out and do their actual work, and I praise them for doing that. And there's plenty of independent journalists out there. And this is something that I think we need to understand. And there's this, and eventually what's going to happen is legacy media is going to collapse because people just aren't going to be interested in it, and we will still have a case of local media, and I think this is something that needs to be brought up. Local media will still exist, but it will probably exist without any of those logos on it. You're not going to see any of those. You're not going to see the peacock logo for NBC or any of these other uh, logos on it in the corner. They're going to be completely devoid of it. They're going to use their own local logos, and it's going to be completely devoid of those logos that you used to. Eventually, those logos are going to go away, and they're going to essentially all of this legacy news media is going to die, and they're probably just those companies are probably going to focus solely on the purpose of uh, the idea of news that comes from the points of or they're not going to focus on news. They're probably just going to focus on entertainment, such as Time Warner is probably, which is CNN, is probably just going to focus on entertainment, and that's the only thing it's going to do. It's probably going to eventually dump CNN because it's not profitable, or at least from a domestic point, is probably going to dump all of its talent, and none of its talent is going to find work anywhere because it's completely useless. Nobody wants overpriced political hacks. Nobody would want to hire them, and they would not have any ability to get work elsewhere. I mean, the best possibility would probably be like someone. Obviously, some of their commentators might have that have worked with them might have a potential shot. Like a Kirsten Powers would have a shot of working elsewhere, and then the only regular I would see is Wolf Blitzer would probably have a shot. Everyone else is going to basically have no job. They're going to have to basically learn another trade. I mean, they're going to have to get something. They're going to have to learn something else, and they better hope that they already have another trade as well, because they're not going to get a job in journalism anymore because they're going to be nobodies, and they could probably be an assistant to someone else as a on of another journalism thing, like another independent journalist, but they're going to be working for a fraction of the price. They're going to be lucky if they make $15,000 to $20,000 a year, and that's going to be lucky if they get that, and that's going to be how things are going to be going, and they're not going to be getting the seven figures that they're used to. And if they want to start writing books, they can, but the fact is no one's going to buy them. They're going to think they're going to consider it to be complete and utter garbage. It's just going to go into the discount pile, just like Hillary Clinton's book of excuses. And that's really the way everything's going to go for them. And you're eventually going to see all of these mainstream news things. They're just going to go the way of the dodo. I mean, you're eventually going to see eventually the way of the future is going to be independent news, and it's going to break out. And regardless of what groups like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all these other groups that want to kind of hinder the development of the independent news, it's not going to hold it back for that long, and it's going to essentially lead to the eventual development to where they're going to uh, eventually explode on the markets, and they're going to control the whole market because it's no matter how much you try to prop up the legacy news media, it's not going to last. It's it's just been dying a big death over the last 30 or so years. You have to understand that people don't buy as many print copies anymore. The advertisers don't really want to advertise with them anymore because of the lack of the market. When it comes down to the digital subscriptions, people just don't do that. People just aren't interested in having to read through these things like they would. They would rather follow stories through a news feed on social media. It's a lot easier. Um, they would rather do that or get their news through social through a video social media site, in which they'd rather get their news from something a little more reputable like independent news. This is why they're even with when it comes down to it, when you start looking at the number of plays, people are skipping right past the uh, the legacy media playlists, the legacy media stations, and they're going straight to the independent ones, and the independent ones are getting more plays because of this. I mean, I believe that it's, I mean, I think that it's, that when PewDiePie does his Pew News with either Poppy Harlow or Gloria Borger, I think that it's more he gets more plays with that than 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 CNN gets with their Poppy Harlow or Gloria Borger. And this should give you an actual idea of what's actually happening. Now his thing is meant as an actual humor thing, and it's what it should kind of show you that how much the actual legacy media is dying, and they just now CNN's supposed to be this big media empire. They shouldn't they shouldn't be able to die to a humorous news parody. They should be able to keep up with that, and they should be able to keep up with one person and a couple of varying producers, and basically it's one person, it's his fiance and a couple of producers is essentially what it is, and that's basically what his team is. And you look at CNN. CNN's a huge freaking organization, and yet they can't keep up with them. Even there's been no corporation to date that's been able to keep up with them. This should be a kind of a key, which shows what the legacy media is failing at. That if an actual humorous site that's actually a gamer can actually kind of beat every news media organization to date, that kind of should show you where they're sitting at. And if he can actually beat it just when covering kind of joke news, that should be kind of a little bit of a key in where they're going. And then when we go actually with serious news with it, they're not even getting the views when it comes to serious news coverage because independent news is killing them. They can't beat any of it. When you start to total their actual views on television, on the actual clicks, on the totaling that with the clicks on their website, and their actual views on the internet, on the social media, they still cannot total what some of these independent people are getting. And it's just pathetic that we've gotten to the point that that we're actually still having them, and that we're still allowing social media to actually prop them up. I mean, we need to allow the market to just let these groups die. And if legacy news media cannot hold its own, it needs to be let to die. Uh, and because they're not showing what the actual market wants, and the market doesn't want repeated same old news coverage night after night, lack of actual journalism, and overpaid political hacks that do not know anything that they're talking about. They don't want that. They want actual, real, legitimate news if they're going to watch news. And they don't want indoctrination from these morons. They're not looking for morons like former head of the CIA Brennan. They want or former head of the NSA James Clapper. They want actually legitimate people that actually know what they're talking about. They don't want these people that are basically either alcoholics or basically people who are beholden to the Communist Party, like Brennan is, and uh, and if you look at Brennan's record, you can actually I can actually validate. If you look at Brennan's record, it'll actually validate that, and you'll actually see that when it comes down to it, you'll see that nobody wants to hear from these people. They see that they're basically just political hacks, and nobody wants to hear from a political hack. They want to actually see legitimate journalism. They want to actually see real breaking stories. What's actually really going out there in the world, and they want to actually get the real truth. They don't want the actual. They don't want what's actually what the actual state wants them to hear. They actually want the legitimate truth, so they actually can make their decisions on their own. Stop this repeating what the state wants them to hear, what the neocons and neoliberals want them to hear. And if they start actually doing that, they'll actually probably get more views and a lot more respect. And it actually earns more money. Sometimes if you take that bold approach, it does earn a lot more money. And we're actually seeing that in the economic, in the actual business plans of the independent journalists. It actually earns more money when you take this bold approach to actually follow journalistic standards and to actually go out there and look for the truth. And while the truth might not be popular with a lot of these legacy news media sites, it's something that if you want to survive, it's the only way to do so, because it might not be popular with the governments to do this, but you need to do that. That's the idea of journalism. You need to be a check on your own government. You can't just basically spit out propaganda, and that's what they've been doing. And they've been saying, we need to be a check on our own government. Well, the fact is you haven't been. All you've been doing is basically trying to lead your government into war. I'm saying that that's presidential. That's not presidential. It's not presidential to basically push a government into war when there's no legitimate reason. The only reason why we should ever be into war is if we've actually been attacked ourselves on our actual homeland. If we have not, there is no legitimate reason. Otherwise, our military should be at home. We should not have any military abroad. And that's the whole point. And that this is what our complete legacy news media completely, this is what they ignore. And they've been ignoring for a long time. They're just about indoctrination. And when we look at what they've been doing is they're just trying to, they'll still try to establish their political goals, but not necessarily in a way that is counterproductive to their business models. They want the status quo, but they're not going to say, they're not going to push for Trump removal from office because they know, or an impeachment, because they don't necessarily want to do things that are necessarily completely against their agenda. If they were to do that and were to show that they were actually being biased in such a way, they would actually what would actually happen is uh, it would actually cause a problem with the whole way that the actual way that Trump would probably react, and he would essentially probably react in a completely different manner and would probably oppose any neocons in his office and would probably have them removed immediately. And they know that they don't want that to happen. They want him to start listening to those neocons, which is why they support the status quo. So they don't want to essentially push him that hard. So they would rather go lightly with it and just start kind of having some of the people talk about impeachment, but have it be more toward essentially more leading him in a certain direction rather than actually talking seriously about pushing it. And that's really where the media is at. The media is not really there to actually really push for ideas such as that, such as actually going that hard. Now, if you like this, now I'm going to kind of end it here. If you like the video, like, subscribe, click the notification bell. Make sure you share it all the way around to your friends, and make sure you share it publicly, and make sure you check out my Patreon page that's in the chat. It's also in the bottom of the description. And if you can't donate, make sure to share it with someone who also can. And that's about it. And I will see you later today for a podcast. Haven't just decided what it's going to be on because I'm a little bit backlogged on my schedule for scheduling what to do on it, but I will figure that out.